Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Old Man Rambles. Um, gonna start off with a little bit that's kind of heavy. Um, my coworker's husband died about a month ago, and that's the heavy part. She hasn't been at work. She's done some working from home. She took like 3 weeks off, um, understandably. I had known he was having some health issues, but I didn't. Last time I talked to her, he was stable. He had a good night's sleep. And then, she kind of vanished from work one day. And a few days later, I just kind of sent her a text saying, "Hey, thinking of you." And then the response I got was, "Thank you. I'm so heartbroken." It's like, oh, I didn't know he had died. I was just kind of reaching out to be supportive. Um, and this person, we've kind of been joking around the house that she's kind of my work wife. I talk to her almost every day. Um, not a lot, but we send each other instant messages. She sends me some messages every morning saying, "Hey, how you doing?" Around quitting time, she's like, "Hey, any dinner plans?" Yada yada, that kind of thing. When we're both actually in the office, we sit next to each other. We have we always go and take like a little 10-minute walk during the day, sometime together, and so I'm probably closer to her than any other people on my team. And I think because of that, um, his death hit me harder than I expected it to. Not be, I don't think I never met him. We don't see each other socially really, but she is the person at the company that I'm closest to. So I was hit harder, more for her sake than because I actually knew him. But she's been working from home, and I check up on her. You know, I'm trying to be helpful and supportive. I try and an instant message. I send her little virtual hugs and stuff, and to check up on her. Like I said, check up on her, to reach out and see how she's doing, and to try and help in any way that I can. But I've been thinking that I couldn't see myself doing this for anyone else on my team. Partly because I'm not as close to them, and partly because it's not in my nature to be, in my introverted nature to reach out to people that I don't feel comfortable with. But I think it's also from a male perspective, men kind of get the raw deal when it comes to grief, I guess. Um, there's another thing that brought this on is this thing from Media Chomp shows up in my social media feed every once in a while. It's like, what's the thing that sucks about being a man? And this guy tells a short story about how when our son died, everyone reached out to my wife to see how she was doing, to offer her help, to give her support, and maybe one or two of my guy friends reached out to me, and no one else did. Not even my own mother. And there was other stories too. The same thing happened. When our kid died, everyone reached out to help me, but by the time I was done with my grief, I noticed that no one was helping my husband. He was working extra hours, drinking heavily, you know. And I know also from a guy perspective, people ask how are you doing, and you say I'm fine, and you're just expected to deal with it. And yeah, in the grief category, men get screwed over. And I mean, even myself, when my sister died back in 2019, I had people kind of ask me how I was, and yeah, I'd say I'm doing okay. But it was a one-time thing. People didn't check up on me. I got well, once, how you doing? I'm okay. Okay, good. And that was it. That's all I got. Even that night, the day she died, I climbed into bed. My wife put her hand on my arm for about 10 or 15 minutes. and that was it, pretty much. You know, she asked me how I was doing, you know, for like a couple days, and then that kind of went away, as I pretty much said I was fine most of the time. And I was guilty of that as the next person. Again, when my sister died, it's not like I reached out to my father to check up on him and see how he was doing. You know, again, I'm guilty of that too. And, you know, it's something that I deeply regret about my behavior, that you know, my father lost his daughter, and I never checked up on him. I never called him to see how he was. You know, we were there at the hospital together, and she died, and he went home and I went home. That was it. That was the extent of our interactions about that until her funeral. And even then, you know, funeral was over and he went back, you know, he went back home to have dinner, didn't invite me. And that came out kind of, you know, well, more than a little bit negative, but it's like, you know, you know, you just buried your daughter, my sister, and you just kind of leave and don't say anything to say, hey, what are you doing? You want to come back to the house? He was like, yeah, I'm just going to go have a dinner. See you later. So, you know, a lot of us are guilty of it, me and my father included. And it's not that we don't, you know, don't need the support. We're just expected to not need it. We're expected to tough it through. You know, and if no matter, you know, we're just supposed to ignore the need for support, for any kind of comfort. You know, tenderness is not allowed. And it really does kind of suck. You know, we just bury this stuff and are just kind of expected to just march along stoically. And we're all complicit in it as well, men and women alike. And I do think it's something that should change. I'm not the guy to change it. As I said, I'm as guilty of it as the next guy. But it's something I thought was worth saying. Good hunting.